All right, we are back here on the Just End the Suffering podcast talking NHL Stanley Cup Playoffs. We are in the middle of the first round. Joining me today, the host of the Sports in the Waiting Room podcast, a big hockey fan, Christopher Russo is here. Christopher, how are you?
I am great, Mike. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you plugging the podcast.
Absolutely. Great podcast. Definitely want to check it out here. Christopher going deep on the hockey, I'm sure, every single week throughout the playoffs, right, Chris?
Yes, certainly. I got back into it this past week. A lot about the Rangers Penguins series in particular, just because that appeals more to the local people. So Rangers stuff, Devils stuff in particular, and Islanders stuff. Look, if they were in it, if the Devils and the Islanders were in it, I'd be talking a lot more about that. But yeah, a little more spread out in the Northeast. So really, really a fun postseason so far.
It has been really fun so far. And I mean, I'm a Rangers fan. You're a Rangers fan. And like, this is a team, like, I mean, just getting back into the games, it reminds you of like, man, playoff hockey is at such a different level compared to like some of the playoffs of the other sports.
Well, first off, I'm going to point out, I look on air. I am neutral as anybody. Believe me, I'm not pulling for anybody. But it's been a wild postseason. I think the fact that it's Rangers Penguins, I think, is a more underrated rivalry. People talk a lot about Rangers Devils, Rangers Islanders, Devils Flyers. Those are some of the big ones. I think people talk about Rangers Bruins, Rangers Capitals a lot. But the Rangers in Pittsburgh now have met 5 times in 15 seasons, 5 times in the last, 5 times in the last 15 years in the playoffs, and 4 times in the last 9. It is a much more intense rivalry than I think a lot of people think. They met up a few times in the Lemieux era, but I think this is a lot more. You could watch, I think, from the first few games. There's hatred in this series from both sides, and so it is very intense.
It absolutely is. I want to start with this series here because obviously it's been wild at this point. I mean, you had the triple overtime game one, the Penguins win that game, Rangers come back game two, win that one. Game three, Shesterkin has the stinker early, gets pulled. Rangers tied up with Georgiev, but they got 3 goals the third period. That stretch at the end of the second period where Domingue stopped 3 straight power plays with the Rangers, basically stonewalled them. I feel like the turning point of that game. What did you just feel on this series? I feel like it's all over the place.
Yeah, this is a very strange series, I would say, because the team that scored first has won 2 of the games. But it's funny. I compared Game 3 once the Rangers had tied that game at 4. I compared Game 3 a lot to Game 1, but from Pittsburgh's point of view, where the Rangers had a 2-0 lead in Game 1. Pittsburgh came back to tie it, and then Pittsburgh had, and then the Rangers had retaken the lead, and then Pittsburgh came back to tie it. So once they tied it at 4, and I think once Heinen gave the Penguins the lead, I thought I got a strange feeling the Rangers are going to win this in triple overtime. But so it was very reminiscent because the Penguins blew a 4-1 lead after one period, and that one was also kind of strange because I thought the Zucker goal, I thought that was very quick that they looked at that and they found evidence to overturn it. But especially after looking at the Cop goal later and hearing that it's more of a judgment call by officials, that made a lot more sense. But I thought it was also, but for the second Pittsburgh goal, I thought it was I don't know if you remember, I think it was on, I can't remember who it was. Was it on Nemeth? It was a very, very soft penalty. A very, very soft penalty that I think was drawn by Danton Heinen. I was very shocked that they called it, and the Penguins ended up scoring on the power play. It's been weird with special teams. I don't know. I would say this game also kind of reminded me of, do you remember at all Game 5, Rangers Montreal in 2014? Montreal runs 7-4.
Yeah, it is very similar to that game.
Yeah, I think the Rangers were also down 4-1 in that game and came back to tie it. And then Montreal won and then kind of buried it with the empty net. The other weird thing about Game 3 with the Rangers was they shut down the Crosby line. You look and you'll see a couple of points for each of those guys, but those were on the empty netters. But it was a lot of secondary scoring. Evan Rodriguez came out of nowhere, and Jeff Carter, who I'm still very surprised that he did not get even a fine or any hearing or anything regarding that hit on Shesterkin. But then again, I think the way and I've said this for a long time, I don't think it's a concerted effort or anything or conspiracy or anything like that. But I think officials tend to look away at a lot of things when it comes to officiating Pittsburgh Penguins games. I think, when you see Sidney Crosby shove PK Subban's head into the ice in the Stanley Cup final and they get matching minors, it's a concern. And so there's leeway when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think, when it comes to some of the officiating.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I noticed with the Rangers this series, obviously, is the Shesterkin stuff is the biggest thing, obviously, because he plays all those minutes in game one, bounces back game two, game three, basically gets chased early. He has a couple of soft goals. Can't blame him. He's tired, I'm sure, because he's played a lot of minutes in this series. But the one thing I think is clear here is that, like, if you're not getting Vezina level Shesterkin, I don't think the Rangers have a shot in this series.
I think that's a fair point. However, I think they should strongly consider starting Georgiev for game four because one, I don't think Georgiev is as bad as people think. And two, I think Shesterkin is tired, especially after game one. I've talked to people about this. There could be a chance, and we see this. You watch at the end of a Stanley Cup playoff run, as soon as a team gets knocked out, you see 4 or 5 injuries that have just been hidden very well. I honestly would not be surprised if Shesterkin was a little banged up after that Carter injury after that Carter hit, because he was down for a little while. So it's been an issue. I would strongly consider starting Georgiev, and I said this when Henrik Lundqvist was their goaltender. The Rangers tend to play better at times in front of a backup goaltender because they know they don't have to rely on a world-class goaltender like a Lundqvist or like a Shesterkin. And they came back from down 4-1 to tie that game at 4, dominated the second period, were very dominant on the power play, but it was just Louis Domingue standing on his head. And then at that point, Georgiev gave in. But it's very possible that they could steal a game with Georgiev in goal.
Yeah, it's also something you notice here with this team, too, is obviously he's very young. A lot of guys on this team are getting their first playoff experience, first playoff road games, first playoff minutes, et cetera. And, like, I think that explains a lot of the inconsistency you see from the Rangers, too, where they can come out like they did in the first period on game one and the second period, game three. They can come out and just, like, dominate. You think this team is going to win the Stanley Cup. They look great. And then they have a period right after. You're like, oh, my God, how'd they make the playoffs?
Yeah, it's really weird. The first period, they were so dominant in game one. They were outstanding. And they go up 2-0. Second period, they're good early on, but Pittsburgh, I think, probably had even more so, I would say, than the first period of game three. I think the second period of game one was Pittsburgh's most dominant. I actually think that after the second, a slight edge would go to the Rangers in terms of better play for the remainder of that game. But ultimately, they were just worn out. They did not pace themselves well, even though the Penguins are older. The Penguins paced themselves well. And more importantly, this has been a problem with the Rangers for years. They could not win a faceoff to save their life. That was a huge issue. And that's one of the biggest things you have to respect. Even if you're a Ranger fan and you think like a lot of the officiating, the woes are because of him, Sidney Crosby is so good at winning faceoffs. That's one of the things you have to respect about him the most. But it's funny because Sidney Crosby and Mika Zibanejad have been about equal in terms of face-off percentage, at least entering game three. It's just that those lower lines have not been incredible on the draw. So, yeah, it's very strange. I have to say right now, especially a couple of plays in game three, I don't know why Patrick Nemeth is on the ice. I've said this for much of the year, as a matter of fact. I don't know why Patrick Nemeth is on the ice. I think he's the one real weak. He's been strong at times, but I think he's the one real weak link for the Rangers, and I don't know why they haven't given a fair shake to Zach Jones, let alone Nils Lundqvist.
Yeah, obviously that's where the injury to Ryan Lindgren is looming large here. I mean, between that one and Barclay Goodrow basically breaking his ankle in game one, now he's week to week at this point. So those two losses really are killing the Rangers, especially the Lindgren situation there, because that's really messing with their entire defensive pairing system here.
Yeah, well, I just saw something. I thought it was maybe the New York Post about Fox and Braun playing together, and that's weird because it's a righty. Even though I know I've said you could bring in Lundqvist to replace Nemeth, even though that's it's a righty replacing a lefty, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very strange situation for the Rangers. And then Goodrow. It's funny. You go back to the beginning of the year, and you forget that Sammy Blais is out for the year and barely got to play for the Rangers after that whole thing early on.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And what do you think is the key here for these teams on the rest of the series? Obviously, we're recording on Sunday night between game three and game four. So, what do you think is the keys here for these teams to try and advance to the next round?
Well, I would again say the Rangers should consider starting Georgiev. I would say for Pittsburgh, Louis Domingue, he's given up a lot of goals, but that again, you said those power plays early on for the Rangers in the third period. The Rangers actually played very well in the power play. They did everything but score. And I think Louis Domingue just stood on his head, and that's what turned the tide of the game. That's what gave the game back to Pittsburgh, even after blowing a 3-goal lead. I will say special teams is going to be huge because the power play has been inconsistent, I would say, for both sides. The penalty kill's been inconsistent for both sides. And I will again say the officiating. I think the officiating in game three was actually a lot better because the officials kind of redeemed themselves because the Zucker goal and the Kopp goal were very similar, and they gave each team a fair shake. I think there were a couple of calls they gave the Rangers down the stretch, even though Pittsburgh had a lot of power plays. And you look at, I think it was game one, Pittsburgh. I think the Rangers had one power play, and Pittsburgh had way more. There were a lot of calls that were missed in game two, especially the Carter call. So that's another thing. And I will say they've got to get Nemeth out of there, and the importance of the first line for both teams, because Crosby's got, I think, 6 points. Now, to be fair, 2 of those are assists on empty netters, but his first line was dominant in the first 2 games. The Ranger first line has been dominant with Kreider and Vetrano in particular shooting the puck, and Zibanejad. But both lines obviously have been horrible defensively. I think they each have about a 0 plus minus. So those two might cancel each other out, and it's probably going to be the depth scoring, which was dominated by Pittsburgh in game 3.
Yeah, so let's go a little bigger picture here. Some of the other series here, because we'll go with the West first, because the West I feel like is pretty, like set up decently in terms of what's going on here. I mean, you got Colorado steamrolling. The Wild Blue series is fun at 2-2. Oilers Kings are about to play game 4 as we're getting ready to record here. Oilers are up 2-1 in that series. And the other big series out west right now, I'm trying to go back to my timetable here. I mean, the Avalanche, I mentioned that one. And the big one surprised me.
Calgary.
Calgary down 2-1 early.
Yeah, Calgary down 2-1 in the series to Dallas. I think I've said this. I think that unless Edmonton makes a run with their star power, I think the Western Conference champion is coming out of the Central Division. I think it's probably going to be Colorado. I think they should be the favorite. But I think Minnesota and St. Louis are also pretty dangerous. I don't think they quite have as much talent as Minnesota does, but as Colorado does. But St. Louis has won the Stanley Cup before. Minnesota's got a lot of good youth. That top line with Kaprizov and Zuccarello has been frightening for the last 2 years now. But it's very good. I think one of the best things I've noticed out of this entire postseason is that in the first round, only one series has been 3-0 through the first 3 games. That's Colorado and Nashville. And even then, Nashville lost in overtime in game 2, goal by Cale Makar. Game 3, I thought was Nashville. There was some questionable officiating, I think, for Nashville in game 3. And I talk about this with my friend Anthony, who does the 87s games with me, the junior hockey games with me, that, we don't really bring up officiating unless it really needs to be questioned, unless it's fair game. And there have been some times where it's fair game. I think you go back to, we spoke about the Rangers Penguins and the officiating. Game 1, I actually thought they made the right call on goaltender interference, even though I thought Kakko got pushed in by Dumoulin. It's still contact. It's whether he's allowed. It's whether it was DeSmith at the time is allowed to play his position, and so they called it that correctly. But then they went the other way against Colorado, or favoring Colorado, when it looked like Landeskog was interfering with Ingram in game 3, and that was a huge goal for Colorado. But I took the Avs to win this series in 5, and it very well could end up in a sweep.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. I think the thing I'm fascinated by is obviously, I think that Calgary series out west also, because they were a team I thought could be a sleeper cup team here, but the fact they're down, I think this gives you concern.
I've heard that from a lot of people, that Calgary's a sleeper cup team, which is funny too, because Edmonton's, at least those top 2 guys, McDavid and Draisaitl, I think it's a more talented team. But Calgary, again, their head coach is Daryl Sutter. I think they've had an even a slightly larger window with guys like Johnny Gaudreau and guys like that. But it's very strange. And Calgary going up against Dallas in particular, it's kind of like if the Leafs would have had to go through the Bruins in the first round, where it's just the kind of this demon you've got to slay eventually. Some people forget that in the bubble, Calgary was 12 seconds away from going up 3-1 on Dallas in the first round. The Stars tied the game with about 12 seconds left in regulation, won in overtime, and then won each of the next 2 games to knock them out. And then as a 3 seed, eventually got all the way to the Stanley Cup final and came within a couple of games of upsetting the Lightning. So Calgary, they've got to win this series in particular. They've got to go through this team.
Yeah, for sure. I think also, let's go to the East. I want to kind of touch on each of these series individually because they're all fascinating right now. We already did the Rangers, but start with the other games tomorrow here. Washington's up 2-1 on Florida, who I thought entered the playoffs as the Cup favorite here, and this Washington team limped into the postseason. I know they were talking about the Rangers, so they try and wizard game this and try and end up with Washington as their opponent here, and there's still a little magic left in the Capitals.
Yeah, it's a bit strange, especially when we found out that Ovechkin was not 100%, and we know their goaltending has been questionable this year. It's obviously, there have been multiple coaching changes. We all think of Barry Trotz as being the guy in Washington when they won the Cup. And so it's different, but I don't know how it's worked out for Washington. I thought Florida would take this series in 5 games. I don't think Florida is a fundamentally sound defensive team whatsoever. But I do think their goaltending is good if they have Bobrovsky really on point. It's strange, though, how they've alternated, but they can score like nobody's business. However, in the Stanley Cup playoffs, that's not how you play. Yet I would say they are more talented and probably in more of a cup window, more in the prime of a cup window than Washington is. I'm very surprised that Washington not only has won 2 out of 3, but mopped the floor with them in Game 3.
Yeah, for sure. I think the series you're describing is also very similar to what's going on with the Carolina-Boston series. Carolina has all this firepower. They win the Metro, which is the toughest division in hockey, and then it's a very experienced Boston team in the playoffs that gets the wild card, switches over divisions here, and sort of maybe the last ride for a lot of that core. And you sit there, watch them go, and you say this is a team that can be a very big problem for Carolina, which has not really had a chance to make a big mark in the Cup playoffs recently.
I was very stunned to learn that until Game 3 in Boston, the Bruins had not led the Hurricanes in a game all season. I was very surprised at that. I think the Hurricanes took all 3 games, I believe, against the Bruins during the regular season. Bruins actually came out firing in Game 1, but the Hurricanes weathered the storm, pun intended, and then were able to really put them away in Game 1, put them away in Game 2. But the Bruins finally, Bruce Cassidy has put back together the perfection line of Marchand, Pastrnak, and Bergeron. And Marchand with 5 points in Game 4 as we record this earlier this afternoon for Boston. They've really stayed alive in this series. I think Carolina is perhaps the most fundamentally sound team in the NHL. I love their defensive strategy. I love an aggressive forecheck. They are so quick to the puck carrier. They're very deep. I don't think there's one line that particularly scares you, but I don't think there's one line that should not be feared in some way, shape, or form. Their goaltending is a little iffy when you consider that Ranta just came back, but it's still definitely an upgrade over what they had with Nedeljkovic, I think, who kind of was a bit of a scapegoat. I think easy to pin that Lightning series on last year. But yeah, the Hurricanes are going to have to wake up in Game 5 for sure, because if they lose Game 5, I can't imagine the Bruins are not going to win Game 6 in Boston.
Yeah, this has been one of those classic series so far where the old mantra is, the series doesn't get real until somebody wins a road game. The home team has held serve all 4 games so far.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with you on that one.
Yeah, and this is also important for the Ranger fans, obviously, because if you win the series here in Pittsburgh, this is your next opponent, whoever comes out of this series.
I think that the Carolina Hurricanes are the one team in the Eastern Conference that absolutely should beat the Rangers in the playoffs. I think the Rangers look, the Rangers probably theoretically could win or lose against any team that's in the Eastern Conference playoffs right now, Pittsburgh included. But I think Carolina is the one team that has truly had their number this year, because the Rangers have played well against Pittsburgh in the regular season. The truth is, Rangers probably should have at least gotten a point in all 4 games. There was actually the first game, I think, was a 1-0 Pittsburgh win. Jari stood on his head, and the only goal came on what I thought was a bad penalty call. That was hooking, I think, by Ryan Lindgren on Sidney Crosby, where he clearly just got the stick. And that they've played Toronto well, they've played Florida well, they've played Tampa surprisingly well, which I don't think I've seen them play Tampa well in a long, long time. They've played Boston decently. They've played Washington fine. They beat them down the stretch. I think Carolina is the one team that has truly tested the Rangers' limits, at least prior to the postseason, and the one team that should scare you if you're a Ranger fan.
Absolutely. I want to get to this last series here. This is one I have some money on here because I'm going into the postseason. I look at the series prices here. I saw that Tampa was basically getting like plus money against Toronto, and I jumped on that one because I said, you know what? 2-time defending champions, love this group's pedigree. Toronto cannot win a big spot. They have to show me that. The series tied 2-2 just as we were getting on the air here. Tampa wins 7-3 in Game 4, not up at 2 apiece. What do you think about where this series is going?
Well, it's weird because am I wrong, or have all 4 games been blowouts so far?
Yeah, I got to look at that series. I'm going to go in here real quick and check.
Well, I know Game 1 was 5-0 Leafs. It was
5-0.
Kyle Clifford with that bad boarding penalty. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, 5-0 Game 1. Tampa won 5-3 in Game 2, lost 5-2 in Game 3, and then won 7-3 tonight.
Oh, you know what? Well, you know what it was, though? Tampa had a 5-1 lead in Game 2, and the Leafs fought back late. I think they just ran out of time. They scored, I think, 2 goals in the last 10 minutes, and I think even had a shorthanded goal as one of them. So that game was a larger margin than the score actually says. But really, these have been 4 blowouts, but 2 wins for each team in this series. So it's very strange. The home team is 2-2, so it's really weird. But I think this one could go either way. I said Tampa in 6 because I don't know if I trust Jack Campbell entirely, especially after last year and the mess that the Leafs made against Montreal, which I thought was a far inferior team, but rode a good structure, rode Carey Price. And now it's just a question of whether the Leafs can play defense. I think Campbell stood up to the test a lot more. Not tonight, obviously, but the Bolts are obviously a much more sound defensive team. They are definitely a deeper team. I don't know about at forward, but certainly on defense, and certainly they have the better goaltender in Andrei Vasilevsky, one of the best goaltenders in the world, Conn Smythe winner last year. You got Victor Hedman, a defenseman, who was the Conn Smythe winner the year before. But this series honestly could go either way, and I think hockey's a winner no matter what, because if Tampa wins, then you have a 2-time defending champion moving on to the second round. If Toronto wins, they've knocked out the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champion in at least 6 games. It's going to be a good series regardless. And remember, if the Leafs lose, if the Leafs get knocked out this year, they already have the record for most calendar years. They will break the record for most seasons between Stanley Cup titles.
Yeah, that's absurd. And for me, it's just one of those things where, like, that team has blown so many series. They've had a lot of chances to close it out. They just can't do it. It's like, for me, I'm like, I can't trust this team until I see them do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the key one we always go, this is long before Matthews and long before Marner, long before Tavares got in, but we always go back to 2013. They blow the 4-1 lead in Game 7 in Boston. Of course, great moment for the city of Boston after the marathon and the run that team made. But if you're a Leafs fan, it's just a nightmare all over. It's 1993 all over again, Leafs Kings. And then last year might have been it. But then again, you think of last year, you almost think of when the Capitals were down 2-0 to the Blue Jackets before going on to come back and win that series and then finally win the Stanley Cup. The Lightning, who had been waiting for so long at such good teams, had blown that series and been swept by Columbus after winning the President's Trophy. They win the Stanley Cup each of the next 2 years. Maybe the Montreal series maybe was finally the catalyst for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah, so obviously that's gonna be a fun series to watch down the stretch here. So last question here is obviously I'm sure you felt your NHL playoff bracket before the playoffs started here. Who did you have in the finals when you filled the bracket out?
For so long, I was thinking that the Colorado Avalanche were going to win the Stanley Cup because they were the team of now, the team that should have won last year, team that should have won the year before. They've got Nathan McKinnon, they've got Gabe Landeskog, they've got Cale Makar, who's maybe the best defenseman in the NHL. Now, I have them in the final. I do want to clarify that. I have them in the final, but I have them losing to the Carolina Hurricanes. I mentioned it again. They're a fundamentally sound defensive team. I am I'm like that. I'm like the parents from the progressive ads. Don't become your parents. Defense wins championships, but goals win games. I think the Hurricanes are just a better team, and I think they are a more sound team than Colorado. I think they're a more sound team than Florida. I think they are a more sound team than the Rangers coming out of this division. If the Rangers end up playing them, I think Carolina's the team to beat.
It was some fun, Chris. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow on social media, keep up with your podcast?
Yeah, so you can find me on Facebook, Chris Russo. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Russo 98, ChrisRusso 98. I don't really post much on there, but you can find me on this. But you can find me on Instagram as well. There are a couple of things I have on there. You can find it's at Chris Russo 98. So if you want to hear from that, just give a ring.
Yeah, if people want to follow your podcast, how do they do that?
Yeah, but it's the same. It's through my account actually. I will promote it once a week. It comes out every Wednesday, at least most Wednesdays during the season, during the EHL season. But now that we are into the summer, I've got a little more time on my hands. I have been churning out episodes each week.
Absolutely. A lot of fun. Check that out, Chris. Thanks all the time. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate it, Mike.